Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Things remain pretty slow around the world of Purdue sports. The NFL draft just came and went without any Purdue players hearing their name called. Got a couple of undrafted free agent signings, but a pretty slow time there. Purdue basketball remains as steady as ever. The transfer portal is starting to really slow down. We have a good idea of what's going on across the country. So today, I wanted to bring on good friend of the show, Jeff Schoenle. You'll remember him as a former Purdue basketball manager, longtime basketball coach at various levels of the sport, including some pretty high levels at the prep school ranks, also at the college level and the high school level. We're going to look back at the year that was, the senior class for Purdue that heads out the door, and look ahead to what's next for the Purdue program as it gets ready to enter into a new era in the post-Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, Fletcher Lawyer world. So I will shut up here. I will get the interview with Jeff going, and we will be back here next week to take a look at some of the big picture stuff going on across the world of college athletics right now. So enjoy the interview with Jeff, everyone. All right, Jeff Schoenle back on the show here. Jeff, thanks for coming on. The last time we had you on the show here, Purdue had just narrowly beaten Oregon, a game that is one of those when you have a good team, it feels like a loss in the eyes of public perception, even though it's a win. And it was a bit of a roller coaster from there on out. Purdue didn't have the regular season that anyone had hoped for. Purdue goes and wins the Big Ten tournament and then makes the Elite Eight. As we kind of look back on this season that was, how do you evaluate it? Was it a success? Was it a failure? Was it somewhere in between? Where do you stand on that?
Well, first of all, Jordan, thanks for having me back. And like you said, the last time we talked, they had basically done a smash and grab at home against Oregon. A game that I was at, and that's not going in the video library at the Naismith Hall of Fame. But I'm just looking at their schedule and what happened right after the 4 games after that Oregon game. They went on the road to top 10 Nebraska, just bushwhacked them, and then kind of held on to survive. Went to an Iowa team that made the Elite Eight and 20-balled them at Iowa. Came back to Mackey, lost to the national champion Michigan Wolverines at home in a game that was probably not as close as the 11-point final. But then they regrouped and beat IU by 30 at home. So you saw glimpses of kind of the dichotomy in that 2-week stretch. You get a Nebraska team that was very good. You get an Iowa team that made the Elite Eight, and you beat both those teams on the road. But then you are basically a non-factor at home in the biggest home game of the year against, the number one team in the country. And so to answer your question, I think you can look at it from both sides. I would venture to say the season is a success. Anytime you can look up and your team has won 30 basketball games in one season, I think you have to chalk that up as a success. That's a lot of games in one season to win. And you make the Elite Eight. And the one thing that I think is very interesting about this Purdue team is you saw glimpses, and then you saw questions sometimes in the same games. And I thought that was what was really interesting to me about this team is it wasn't like they could get on a 3-week heater. They would get on like a 10-minute heater and then go right back to struggling in the same game, same opponent, same situations. And just the ebbs and flows, I think, lead people to feel like this season could have been more.
What do you attribute that to? Obviously, the defense is probably the biggest part, right? Purdue was a limited defensive team. But is there something beyond those defensive inconsistencies that you attribute that to?
Um, I think obviously that's the biggest thing. When you look at, if you just take the roster individually as defensive players, I think of your starting five, you've got one above average defender, and that's CJ Cox. I think you have two average, can be decent defenders in Braden Smith and Oscar Clough, and then you have two guys who we're probably always going to struggle defensively due to different reasons. I mean, Fletcher Lawyer, great player, not the fleetest of foot laterally. And Trey Kaufman-Renn, also not the fleetest of foot laterally, and having to guard kind of outside of a position he should normally guard. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know about how consistent the leadership was on the team. You could see guys getting visibly frustrated with themselves, with each other, with, I'm sure the coaches at some point during the year. And that's something that if you have really solid leadership, that doesn't affect you. Like it's a natural human reaction to get upset, get frustrated at things. But then if you have solid leadership, you're able to bounce back right away, 10, 15 seconds later and kind of say, all right, I let it out. Now we got to regroup. And it seemed like the mistakes that this team made lasted longer than you would hope for them to. They would eat it for, minutes and minutes, and sometimes like entire halves where, you look at the first half of the Michigan game, and yes, Michigan is a phenomenal basketball team, but that was just a game where you looked and they were getting frustrated offensively and kept trying to do the things that were making them frustrated. You look at the first half at IU, just a very blah effort in what should be, a game where you just want to put your foot down their throat for 40 minutes, and you dig yourself too big of a hole to come back from. So I don't know necessarily, and again, I'm not in practices every day. I'm not in the locker rooms. I don't want to say the leadership was poor. I just don't know how natural it is for somebody like Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith to be leaders in a sense of playing guys around a unifying principle. Trey seems like a very introverted, quiet, lead by example type guy, very competes, plays his ass off. I don't know how much he's able to gather other people around, and inspire others, verbally. I think Braden tries. I don't know if that's necessarily his natural personality to be other than just a psycho competitor for himself. And again, that's also on the other guys that have to fall in line when the three seniors are, taking you to task. There were inconsistencies on every player in the roster this year. But at the same time, like I said earlier, you win 30 games, you did a bunch of stuff right. You were able to, and the one thing that amazed me is, coming down the stretch, they lose 4 of their last 6, starting with that Michigan game. Their only wins were the blowout against IU, and then basically another kind of smash and grab win at Northwestern. They lose by 2 at Michigan State. They lose to Ohio State when, they were struggling. They lose at home to Wisconsin where they gave up 5,000 points, and 200 threes. For them to, it's very hard to have a team that loses their mojo. You usually don't see them get it back. It's usually not something where, hey, you course correct and now you're back to where you were before, when they went to Alabama and beat a very good Alabama team, where they took it to Texas Tech. An Auburn team that, yes, didn't make the NCAA tournament, but won the NIT. That was never a game outside of the first 3 minutes in Indianapolis. And they have they beat Wisconsin by double figures at Wisconsin. They have good wins, and then it kind of just, you could kind of see teams figure them out defensively, especially. And you did have guys, I think, playing through their offense. But what they did in Chicago to get it back, you beat a Northwestern team that you just barely escaped from. You pretty much control that game. You take it to Nebraska and prove that first win fluke. You get a UCLA team that is not necessarily desperate, but that game was kind of odd because of Dent getting hurt, Bilodeau being out. And you could tell Purdue was just trying to manage the game, just trying to get out of there, get a win if possible, but not try and overtax their guys. They did a great job of using the bench in that game. And then you play a Michigan team, the best team in the country, and you hang with them for the first half, and then you take it to them in the second half. That was very impressive, and that's what I think should be the defining aspect of the 25-26 Purdue Boilermaker basketball season, are those 4 days in Chicago.
Yeah, it was a great run, and it's one of those that I understand when people say that conference tournaments don't matter. I think when you win the regular season title, they don't mean very much, but when you don't win that regular season title, it gives you a great opportunity to kind of redefine your season a little bit, and it gives fans a great memory. I mean, after all, this is the entertainment world, and it was an incredibly entertaining run. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Jeff, you've been around the program pretty closely for the better part of the last 25 years, and this senior class very well might be the best one to ever come through Mackey Arena in the campus in West Lafayette. Just talk a little bit about what they've meant to the program, the way they've elevated the program, the senior class's legacy with Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Trey Kaufman-Ratton.
Yeah, I think especially during the course of the year, people, and we have our esteemed friend Brian Newbert, who always says, don't take the good days for granted, because the good days don't always stay good. Statistically, yes, they're up there. Their resume stacks up with any senior class. The Three Amigos, the Baby Boilers, the three-peat teams in the mid-'90s. You put Smith, Lawyer, and Kaufman-Wren and their resume, it matches or exceeds any of those classes. I think a lot of fans were always wanting more without realizing that these guys are pretty damn good. And to want more is just maybe too much to ask for. Not that you don't want it, but like, what more could these guys possibly do? What more could you ask of them? They're never causing any drama. All they care about is winning. All they do for the most part is win. They won more games than any senior class. Their names are littered all over the record book, not only Purdue's, but the NCAA's, with Braden being the all-time assist leader. How much more is reasonable to ask of them to provide for the program? And especially in the times that college sports and college basketball is in now, when you have somebody like John Blackwell, who's been a 3-year star at Wisconsin all of a sudden decides, I'm done with this. I'm going to go somewhere else for my senior year. These guys stayed. And last year wasn't as successful as they wanted to be. Yeah, they made the Sweet 16. They gave Houston everything they wanted. But there's still a bitter taste in their mouth that season ended. And I'm sure there was a bitter taste in their mouth when they realized they were the 7th seed in the Big Ten tournament. You know, with all the tiebreakers, you finished, for all intents and purposes, 7th in the Big Ten when you were the preseason number 1. And to come back and just refuse to accept that this is how your career is going to end. Can we pick faults with each one of them and say, yes, I wish they did this better? Of course. You could go to any team in the country. You can go to Michigan and look at some of their guys. I'm sure Dusty May would say, yeah, I wish they would do this better. I wish he would do this better. I wish he would do this better. You're going to have that. This is a imperfect game being played by imperfect people. If this was a perfect game being played by perfect people, it'd be boring. It's the ebbs and flows. It's the unknown. It's the anybody can beat anybody on any given day type aspects of Cinderellas and upsets in the NCAA tournament, which makes college basketball, in my opinion, one of the best sports, if not the best sport to follow and watch that there is. And for those guys to do what they did over the 4 years, and they had to adapt to different styles of play, different roles. Yes, they're doing the same thing, but different things are being asked of them each year. And for them to achieve the heights that they did, I don't think you realistically look back on their careers in West Lafayette and be anything other than extremely proud and thankful and grateful that they chose to come to Purdue.
Something that stands out to me too, it was such a big deal in December of 2021 when Purdue hit number 1 in the AP poll for the first time. And it was short-lived. It lasted a week. Ron Harper Jr. hits a half quarter, and that was that. But then this group comes in, and in 3 of their 4 years, they spend time at number 1 in the AP poll multiple weeks in every year. It feels like this group, and certainly in conjunction with Zach Edey and that group, they overlapped for 2 years, but really elevated the public perception of Purdue basketball. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, 100%. 100%. When you looked at the time when Purdue achieved that first number 1 ranking back in early December of 2021, it was viewed as, oh, good for Purdue. Here's a plucky program, does things the right way, doesn't necessarily have a ton of stars, but gets good players that can turn into stars. Good for Matt Painter. I don't think anybody outside of the Purdue basketball sphere could look at that point then in December, especially after Rutgers beating them on that last second shot, and foreseen the next 5 years. This program's, and I talked with a couple people, Brian, who we mentioned earlier, and he and I were talking about this. Purdue's floor of where they will be as a program is so high. Like, you will never see a Purdue team as long as Matt Painter is the head coach, in my opinion, ever win fewer than 20 games in a season. I think there may be only a handful, maybe 1 or 2 years for the rest of Painter's tenure where he might not win 25 games in a year. That's unbelievable. Especially with the ebbs and flows, how college basketball is now, the inconsistencies of programs. I mean, you see teams that have won national titles struggle to make the NCAA tournament. Where is Baylor after they won their title? They're in a state of flux. You have Kansas, down year for them, title 4 years ago. It's like the remember the Jordan Cornette quote after when Butler made one of their Cinderella ones back 20 years ago. We are still here. And that's, I think, what Purdue is. We are still here. No matter what goes on, no matter what people say, we are a constant and we are here to stay. And I think these past, since that point from the Rutgers game to now, Purdue has proven that they are going to be a major factor every single college basketball season. And if you want to be successful, Purdue is the benchmark that you have to strive. And if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. And that now includes Purdue.
And that's kind of the perfect segue. We put to bed the last 4 years, and Purdue loses a lot, right? I mean, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer started every game they played at Purdue. Trey Kaufman-Renn started every game he played in the last 3 seasons. Oscar Clough was a massive piece of Purdue this past year. As you look ahead to next year, what are some early thoughts that you have about the team from a personnel perspective with what Purdue brings back?
I think the worst thing people can do to next year's team is compare it to this past year's team. They will be entirely different. They will be different offensively. They will be different defensively. They are not going. You can't pigeonhole the new rotation pieces, the new players, into the same roles as the players who just left. Okay, Jakari Harris is not Fletcher Lawyer, and that's okay. Omer Meyer is not Braden Smith, and that's okay. Jack Benner and Caden Pierce are not Trey Kaufman-Renn, and that's okay. There's plenty of different ways to win basketball games. This team will look a lot different. It's not going to be Braden Smith being in control of every possession and deciding who gets a shot and what plays are made. It's not going to be throw it down in the low post like it was with Zach Edey every possession. This team is going to look different. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worse. Now, that's a high bar to set, but you have guys who have only really known winning. It's not like the earlier teams where, yes, in the COVID year of 2019, 2020, Purdue would not have made the NCAA tournament. That was not a great basketball team. The pieces on this team have only known winning. And when you only know winning, you forget how to lose. And you hold yourself to the standard that it takes to win every single day. It's a very difficult thing to do. I read the message boards on Gold and Black. People get frustrated when something goes wrong or they lose a game. And I think people feel, and I get this is the point of fandom, like it's a divine birthright that Purdue wins all their basketball games. These other teams have scholarships too. They have NIL and rev share too. They have good coaches. There's a lot more than 12 good basketball players in this country. They're going to be spread out to different schools. And yes, there are schools that are good basketball programs. So say that, you want to hold teams to this lofty standard. Those players want to hold themselves to that standard too. And while it may be different, and you may not see the same Purdue that you have the past 4 years, it still has a lot of pieces that, when put together correctly, can be a very, very good basketball team. I think the most intriguing part of this year for me next season is going to be defensively in the backcourt, because I think this has the potential to be the best defensive backcourt Purdue's had probably since Keaton Grant, Chris Kramer, E'Twaun Moore. All three of those guys were ranging from good to elite defensive players. I think Keaton Grant's probably one of the most underrated players that Matt Painter's had. E'Twaun Moore certainly underrated as a defender with his length and intelligence. And I mean, Chris Kramer, can't really say more about what he did defensively. I think this guard backcourt group next season has a chance to be on that level defensively. You looked at the growth Omer Meyer had. He was taking on some of the top players on the opposition in January and February in the middle of the Big Ten season. That's for somebody like him coming from European basketball with his background as a scorer, as a primary offensive guy, to accept that. And yes, he had struggles, but he had a lot of high points too. You look at DJ Cox, who's been asked to guard the best perimeter player basically for the last years. That experience is going to pay off. You know, the staff has talked about Jakari Harris as being a potential defensive player of the year candidate, and you saw him with his versatility to guard, you know, anybody from 6 foot to 6'7", 6'8". This is going to be a really intriguing backcourt. And you have a shot blocker back there now in Daniel Jacobson, who's going to be allowed to play through some mistakes and get more comfortable. And him with a healthy offseason, I think you're going to see growth in his game as well. This could be a very sneakily good defensive team for Purdue next year, which they haven't always been the past 5, 6, 7 years.
No, and it's interesting. It is because Purdue has shifted so much in the direction of skill and offensive skill being its primary emphasis, when it recruits and things like that. And you really can't argue with the results. On the offensive end, this is where I'm really interested because I agree. I'm very high on what this Purdue team can be defensively. What are you looking at as, I know you go to some summer practices and things of that nature. What are you looking at as areas to watch for Purdue on the offensive end in determining how good it can be at scoring the basketball?
I think the number one thing for me, and this is pretty much every single season, it doesn't matter the personnel, it doesn't matter, the style of play. If you want to win in college basketball, you have to be able to make and shoot a high percentage and be efficient from the 3-point line. There's no real option for you to be as successful as you want to be if you are a poor 3-point shooting team. So that's the question, can Omer Meyer shoot, 38, 39, 40% on the volume that he's going to take? Will CJ Cox get as many wide open threes this year or this coming year as he did the last 2 years playing off of Braden Smith? He's probably going to be, at least at the start of the year, I would imagine, the top guy on the scouting report for opposing defenses. Can Jakari Harris, who's had some absolutely ridiculous Holmby Road shooting splits this year, can he prove to be a consistent 35 to 37% guy on reasonable volume? I don't think he's going to threaten, Carson Edwards' 3-point attempts record. But can he be a guy who, shoots 37% on 2 threes a game or 2.5 threes a game? Can he make 1 to 1.5 threes a game and average, 8 points? Do we see Caden Pierce and Jack Benter at the 4 spot become good shooters that allows the lane to open up for these guards to attack? I think that's the biggest thing. I do think it's going to be more motion based. I do think assists are going to be decentralized. It would not surprise me at all if somebody like Caden Pierce leads the team in assists with maybe like 4. Still a decent amount, but not the 7, 9 that we're used to with Braden. I think this is going to be a very, decentralized playmaking by committee type offense, more motion based. I think that's good that Matt Painter gets back to his roots with that. I think I wonder how much they're going to do set wise versus system wise. Oh, and that'll be really interesting to figure out. And then obviously, can you can you score inside when you have to? When the game slows down, are you able to get those tough baskets in the paint? Are you able to get to the basket either via post-ups, passes, driving the ball from the perimeter? You have to be able to score when the game slows down, and that often includes getting to the basket, getting to the free throw line. I do think this could be a very good free throw shooting team. It wouldn't surprise me to see them in the upper 70s percentage wise, 70 to 78% as a team. I think you have a lot of very good free throw shooters. I do kind of wonder about the amount of free throws being taken. Not great at getting to the foul line this year. I think for multiple reasons. One, Braden Smith's efficiency in the mid range. Two, if you look at Fletcher Lawyer's shooting stats from his first 3 years to this year, let me pull up. I've got it in front of me right now. His 3-point attempt rate was the highest it's ever been this year by a large amount. 70% of his attempts this year were from three. Do you have, Trey Kaufman-Renn, not the best free throw shooter. He's going to score to attempt to not get fouled. He doesn't want to get to the free throw line because he's not a great free throw shooter. He's good enough to score around you, not through you. I wonder how the free throw attempts come with this. I wonder how offensive rebounding happens. But I think you're going to see a very dynamic Purdue offense. I think the three guards that come back, it'll be interesting to see how they work Caden Pierce into this, but all three of them are comfortable making plays for themselves or others. So it's going to be interesting to see how these puzzle pieces fit together, because it's going to look very different than it has before. I think it could be almost like that 2017, 2018 team where you had Vince doing a lot of the playmaking duties and Dakota doing a lot of the playmaking duties.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's as unknown of a team as we've had in a while, and it's funny because the last time we had a Purdue team like this, where you went into the season and just kind of shrugged your shoulders and said, I don't know, they'll probably be all right, but I don't know. Purdue goes out and wins PK 85 over Thanksgiving and goes to #1 in the country, and the rest was history. That all those expectations of some growing pains go out the window. The interesting thing to me is that I don't know the last time Purdue has gone into a season with such an unproven front court. As you look at Daniel Jacobson, as you look at Raleigh Burgess and Sinan Huan coming in, you really don't have someone who's proven that they can get you a bucket in the low post. Even we had a decent idea what Trey Kaufman-Renn was capable of from his sophomore to junior year. He just couldn't show it because the National Player of the Year was standing next to him. What do you make of Purdue's front court situation going into next season?
I think it needs to be a kind of get in where you fit in type situation, where you're obviously not going to have the front court usage that you've had the past 5-6 seasons. Going back to when Trevion Williams was starting for Purdue back at the early part of the decade. I think, those guys are going to have to figure out where my points are going to come from. How can I get my points? They're going to have to be factors on the offensive glass. I think you can see Caden Pierce use his quickness and athleticism. Daniel Jacobson uses height and length to get on the offensive glass. I think Raleigh Burgess is a very high effort guy who I think people will be surprised at the leadership that he's going to take on next year's team. The couple practices that I've been to, he was very vocal this year with kind of the second unit guy and kind of the de facto leader of that second unit. How he responds from his leg injury, coming back, getting a full year and summer healthy, Daniel Jacobson having a healthy offseason. And those guys being able to step out and shoot, which is something that Purdue front courts have not been able to do, save Mason Gillis for the past several years. That's going to be interesting to see how much they leverage 3-point shooting by, especially the thing just is better suited at the 5. I don't think he's a great lateral athlete. I think he's got enough size and strength to at least hold his own against a lot of post players. How much is going to be asked of him? I don't know right now. I think he's better suited at the 5. And if you can get him and Daniel Jacobson just be credible threats, they don't have to take 3 a game each. You don't want your centers taking 5 3-point attempts a game. But if they can step out there and at least cause defenders to have to come out away from the restricted area, that's only going to benefit Purdue offensively. And how they leverage their shooting is really interesting. Do you see some inverted actions where they post Caden Pierce? Can you get Omer Meyer into post ups and ball screens at the 10-foot area? You saw some of that with Braden Smith, who would catch it kind of inside the 3-point arc, and you'd run a ball screen very, very close to the paint. That's all interesting. Can Omer just rise up and shoot over guys with his size at 6'4", in that, 5 to 10 foot area? Front court wise, defensively, I think it's going to be, rebounding is obviously, like you mentioned earlier, the first and primary concern. You're losing Oscar Clough. You're losing Trey Kaufman-Renn, 2 of the best rebounders in the Big Ten. How do you replace that? Especially when you don't have a proven rebounder really on the roster, and maybe the physical profile of your front court doesn't necessarily give you, I don't want to say a lack of confidence, but just a lack of a known commodity. The coaching staff is going to go into next year wondering what exactly they're going to get on the glass from this front court. And so that's, I think, the guards are going to have to play into that as well.
The last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Jeff, and then I'll let you get the sustainability of this all. We talk about the transfer portal and the movement of guys, and it's borderline unprecedented. I think I saw Michigan State had a guy go in the portal, so I think Purdue and Virginia were the only 2 power conference schools to not lose a scholarship guy to a transfer this year. How sustainable is what Purdue is doing? Or as I said on the last podcast, that it feels sustainable until it's not. But how do you kind of view what Purdue is doing, Purdue's culture, Purdue's place in all of this right now as we sit here on April 22nd, 2026?
In terms of sustainability, I completely agree. Sustainable until it's not. You don't know, and that moment will not be known until it happens. I think for Purdue, they've definitely earned the benefit of the doubt from not only the fan base, but from, national pundits and things like that, to understand that this way works for Purdue. This is how it's going to be at Purdue. And doing it this way can lead to very high levels of success. We can talk about the sustainability of college basketball as a whole. That would be a 3-hour podcast, and I can sum it up by saying this is not sustainable in the long run for the general health of the sport. You go back to guys like John Blackwell leaving Wisconsin, guys who've been at places for 3 years, have had success there. It reminds me a little bit of high school players leaving the high school, who've gotten all the offers you could want, leaving the high schools they've been at for 3. Like, what are you really searching for? And is it the right thing to be searching for? I'm one of the most staunch supporters of these kids need to be compensated for the money they make for other people. Too long, too few people have gotten rich at the hands of college athletes. You know, looking at coaches' salaries now, especially in college football world, $10-15 million a year coaches, that the buyouts that are going, you can't tell me that the kids haven't contributed to this more than just, scholarship, books, room and board. But in terms of what Purdue's done, I think they're very, and we've talked on the phone about this multiple times, they're very intentional, they're very strategic, and they know what they're looking for, and they're not going to be swayed by something that isn't that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. I think it's sustainable until it's not, and that could come at any time, right? We could see this where Purdue's culture continues to win out, and Purdue continues to retain players better than anyone else in the country. I mean, we're 6 years into the portal era now. Purdue still hasn't lost a player that it really wanted to keep to the portal, that it really needed to keep. It hasn't lost that massive impact guy. Will that come at some point? I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah. And there's obviously going to be a point sometime in the future, could be after next year, could be 10 years from now, where Purdue loses a guy that they want to keep. I've talked with people, and this has been bandied about, like, what would Carson Edwards be like in the NIL era at Purdue? What would he have made at Purdue? He wouldn't have stayed at Purdue. The University of Texas would have offered him $4 million a year, and he would have gone home. Like, he was homesick. There were times where it was very hard for him at Purdue, being that far from home. There's going to come a time. You look at Purdue's roster next year, the scholarship guys who are from the state of Indiana, Zach Benter and Luke Ertl. There's guys from, CJ Cox is from outside of Boston. Jakari Harris is from Atlanta. Daniel Jacobson, I think his family is in Chicago now. So that's at least somewhat close. You look at Omer Meyer, obviously an international player. Caden Pierce is from outside Chicago, so that's close. But you look at these guys that there's no real natural ties to Purdue outside Jakari Harris being Glenn Robinson's son. There's no legacies. There's going to be a point where somebody gets an offer that they can't refuse. Like my dad always told me, all it takes is money. Everybody has a price, and you can accomplish anything if you have enough money. There's going to be a time where Purdue's NIL situation, be it as it may not stack up to what other schools can provide. I know the Purdue fan base isn't necessarily one that is, loading up the wagons, rounding up every nickel and dime to put towards paying athletes. It is what it is. But you have to look, kind of circling back to this thought, you have to look at, like you said, through the first 6 years of the portal era under Matt Painter, and no offense to the guys who have left in that time, not one of the players that left would have made Purdue better had they stayed. Not one of those players would have moved the needle for the subsequent Purdue team had they stayed. Not one. I feel very confident in saying that. You have to get Painter and his staff, and really also it's on the players in the program too. They have to make it be a situation where they bring other new people into the program. They're the ones who are in the locker room day in, day out. And Matt Painter said this 100 times if he said it once, the best teams are player-led teams. The culture doesn't exist because Matt Painter makes it so. The culture exists because Matt Painter preaches a standard to the players, and he gets the players who are willing to uphold that standard and work towards it every day. So, do I think it's sustainable for Purdue? It certainly appears that way. Now, what college basketball looks like in 5 years from now, nobody knows. Nobody would have thought it would look like this 5 years ago. We'll see what the legislation, the 5-and-5, the one-time transfer rule, how much that affects player movement. I've got no hope that there's going to be any sorts of regulations on the CSC and the House settlement with regards to money. The revenue share amount is the baseline now. And it's all how much your school and your donors can put together for packages for players to get them. You have players basically holding programs hostage by saying, I'm going to go in the portal, you're going to pay me this or I'm going to leave. Is that really healthy and sustainable for college basketball? We look at there are a few upsets in the NCAA tournament, and there's different articles that say, NIL isn't the main reason, but you don't have a lot of these senior-led teams that have been together for 4 years that can come up and beat high major teams in the tournament, because those guys have left for bigger paydays. If you're good as a sophomore in the Colonial, you're getting a ACC team to offer you money. You're getting if you're a really good player in the Sun Belt, some SEC school is going to offer you $1.5 million, and that's going to look a whole lot better than the $300,000 you're getting, in the Sun Belt. I like my job. If somebody offered me 5 times as much to do the exact thing, I'm going to go into work tomorrow, box, put all my stuff in it, chuck the deuces, and say best of luck to you all.
Yeah, it's still the wild, wild west out there, and whether it's ever going to stop or not, eventually I think it has to, but who knows what that process looks like. Jeff, any parting thoughts for the listeners here on the Boilermaker basketball program as we enter the summertime?
It is a very, very good time to be a Purdue fan. You have a basketball program that is successful, does things, I'll say, as close to the right way, quote unquote, as you can. You have a face of that program in Matt Painter that is one of the most egoless, down to earth, normal human beings in a profession full of abnormal things and socially awkward, inept dickheads, for lack of a better term. College basketball coaches are not the best of society. It's a incredibly competitive, cutthroat industry to be in. The industry has forced itself to be that way. It's not these coaches' faults. It's how the industry has been for decades now. It's just all magnified now with the television presence, with social media, with blogs and podcasts and over coverage of the sport. This has always been there. There's just a bigger flashlight on it. But you have somebody in Matt Painter who has done this about as well as anybody could do it. Purdue is not a program that is without its disadvantages. It is not the cream of the crop in terms of resources. Facilities are good, but they're not amongst the top 5 or 10 in the country. This is somebody who's done it through their own ingenuity, creativity, and basically willpower. And to know that that's the person leading your program, that has to provide you as a fan with a sense of not only pride, but security and confidence.
Fantastic stuff. Jeff, thanks for coming on again. I always appreciate having you on in our conversations. And next time we talk to you, it'll be time to preview the basketball season. The leaves will be falling, the temperatures will be dropping, and the sound of basketballs will be filling the gyms of Indiana once again.
The squeak of the sneakers, the chirp of the whistle, and the angry fans telling people to rebound.
Yes. Thanks, Jeff.
So I appreciate it, Jordan. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure to join you on here. Love what you're doing. And thanks so much again.